Unfortunately, already at this point, this is actually winning for white, because the problem is that even though I have this pawn here on a2, it's sort of like the hostage pawn. I forget who coined that phrase, but I really liked it, whoever said that, where like the pawn is in front of the king. So it's like, if this pawn wasn't here, then of course it's like, you know, you got the federales, and of course the king just dies on a1. But with the pawn in the way, you can't really get to the king here. So because of that, if I try a3 b3 for example, there's no way to get to the king. So for that reason, it's just it's very bad already, because I have no attack. This pawn just kills any attack towards the king, because it's just all in the way. So after the 16, which I lost to Levon. Okay, so here we go. Oh wait, sorry, there we go. So after the 16 that I lost to Levon, this meant I had 4 draws and 4 draws and 2 losses. Very bad performance. I was down at the bottom of the table and not in a very good mood. Now I do think that after that game, I don't remember if we played another game before rest day, or if there was a rest day in between, but in the 7th round I had the white pieces against Veselin Topalov. So we will go through this game, so we still have some time. So I start with d4. Veselin plays d5 here, and now I play c4, and he plays c6, and now I play knight f3, knight f6, and I go e3. Now one thing about this tournament that was very unusual is that a lot of the players in the event were playing the Slav. So for example, in the first game, or not the first game, but I think my first white game against Peter Savidler, for example, he was playing he played this Slav. He played the d takes c4 a4 e6 Slav against me. In the third game against Anish, I played a slightly different order. I played this order, and we played into the Moran system of the Slav. And now in the 7th game, again we get another Slav defense. Now here I play e3 again. I think because after knight c3 d takes c4 a4 e6, I didn't really have an idea, and I didn't want to go into this, so I chose to play this setup. So I played knight c3 e3, I played knight f3 e3, I played knight f3 knight c3, but a lot of Slav games. So bishop f5 is played by Veselin. I play knight c3 here, e6, and now I go knight h4, going after the bishop on f5. Similar actually to the game that we looked at, that our subscriber Devon's played in an over the board tournament in the London system. Same kind of concept, where you bring a knight out to attack the bishop on f5. Bishop g6 is played here. We trade, and now I go rook b1. Now this was something that I prepared before the game. It's worth noting that I have played this more recently. Oddly enough, this was, I think, was a partial idea that Peter Lecco came up with. And the funny thing is that in the Meltwater Champions Chess Tour, in my tiebreaker against Maxime Vachier-Lagrave in, I think that was December 2021, I actually played the same rook b1 line, and Peter himself was commentating on the game, so it's pretty funny to see. So I play rook b1 here, knight bd7 played by Veselin, and now I go c5. Now the idea is quite simple. If I play c5 right away after b6 b4 a5, I cannot keep the pawn chain intact with a3, because after pawn takes pawn, I lose the rook. So the point behind rook b1 sort of is twofold. By playing rook b1, I still want to go c5 and b4, but with the rook on b1, I might also want to play b5 and rip open the b file. And now, of course, after knight d7 c5 b6 b4, if a5 a3, the rook is no longer on a1, so I keep this chain intact. The connect 4 is good, and I'm doing quite well. So those are the two concepts behind playing rook b1, is that I want to go c5, but let's just say you get some move like this, for example, castles b5. I can also use the rook on the open b file as well. So he plays a5 here. I go a3, again trying to keep the pyramid of Giza intact here. Bishop e7, and now I go g3 here, creating maybe also like a flying v as well here if I can ever go h4, because I can get f2 g3 h4 and f2 e3 d4. So a lot of fun formations here. So I play g3, e5 is played. I go bishop g2. Now I do want to play b4 at some point, but I don't have to play b4 right away, because black is not playing b6 to challenge the pawn chain just yet. So I go bishop g2, e4 is played by Veselin, and now I play b4, and now he takes, I take, and he goes knight to f8 here. Now this is a very tricky position to assess, because on the one hand we both have connect 4s here, opposing connect 4s, as you guys can see. On the other hand, my bishop on g2 is staring at a very big pawn chain here, so it doesn't really have any scope on this diagonal. And if black is able to get, let's just say, well, I'm just going to make some random moves to illustrate the point. If black can get this sort of like vice grip with e4 and g4, and then go like knight g5 knight f3, black is actually probably just winning here. So it's a very tricky position to assess, and I think both sides have chances. So here I play b5, Knight e6 is played by Veselin. I play bishop d2 and he goes castles again. I think if black tries to go g5 g4 right away here, I believe I can play f3 and take with the bishop, prevent this, and long term I might eventually be able to prepare some pawn to e4 push at some point. So here I decide to castle, or he castles. I decide to go knight a4. So I go knight a4 here. He plays knight g5, and now I go pawn to h4. So after pawn to h4, the reasoning behind this is that I'm inviting Veselin to play knight f3. Of course, if he goes back to e6, he feels like a moron, because why did he just waste a move of the knight? I mean, a top level chess player, former world chess champion, I mean, he can't play a move like knight g5. I mean, that's just no good. So that's so like a top player, a world champion, I mean, you can't play moves like knight g5 and go back. The only people who can do it are the people who have no respect for themselves, also known as computers, like Stockfish. They have no respect, they'll just play whatever because it's the best move. So like for a human like Veselin, I mean, knight g5 is just kind of a very weird move. I think in this position actually, after g5 here, black is probably doing fine, because now f3 is a lot less effective, because after takes g4, my knight is on the rim, and now I'm gonna have to go back. Now the knight D's puka are really jumping here from g5 and f6, going to e4, going to f3, and it's very, very scary. So here I think g5 is actually the right move, because I put the knight on the rim, which is also why in this position after g4 I can't take, because then I lose the knight. I lose the knight on a4 here. So it's so knight g5 is probably not the best move, but Veselin does like to play aggressively, and so he had an idea in mind with knight f3. So knight f3 I take, he takes, and now I trade and I go knight c3. Again, I can't take the pawn on f3, because if I take the pawn, he just takes the knight on a4. Knight c3, and now he goes bishop takes c5. Now this was a very interesting idea by Veselin, played on a concept. I suspected in this position, if he had just played normal moves like queen d7 and rook a e8, he's probably completely fine with like bishop d8. Let's say castle, bishop d8, bishop a5 to target the knight, get the knight to e4. I mean, I have a nice flying v here, but black doesn't really have weaknesses in knight e4, f5, g5 combined with bishop a5, and I think that black is okay here. Again, another example of like why computers are so annoying, because actually no, sorry, computer says bishop d8 is the best move, to go bishop a5 right away, because for a human, you look at this position, you're just like, okay, I mean, but I'm down a pawn here, I'm worse, like what can I do here? Whereas a computer is just like, okay, nobody cares about a pawn because your pawn structure is just terrible. So basically this is why it's very hard sometimes to look at games, or I mean, at least I think for people who are newer, it's kind of funny sometimes to look as well, because they see these moves by humans and they're like, what's going on? Like, you're just so bad at this game. Like, a computer says zeros, like why can't you find the best move? But again, psychology plays a big role, and realizing that you're just down a pawn here is not what you're looking for. So Veselin, sort of realizing that he's going to be down a pawn and thinking he's in real trouble, unlike a computer would think, goes for bishop takes c5. Pathetic humans, pretty much. So here he takes, I take, and now he goes d4. Now the idea behind d4 is very simple. Veselin decides in this game he's going to try to get the patented lolly checkmate. So I take, I castle, and now he goes queen g4. And the idea here is that white is up a piece here, but it's a very weak king side here. There's queen h3, there's knight g4, queen g2, queen h2. A lot of checkmating patterns exist here. So for that reason, it's quite hard to play. My knight and my bishop are a little bit, they're not really coordinated very well. They really aren't. The bishop on d2, specifically, like say I go bishop e3 here. After rook a d8, I'm getting lolly. Basically, I can't keep my queen on a diagonal to target the pawn. Say queen h3 here, I just take, and there are no mate threats. Or I should illustrate, I guess. Here takes knight g4, I go queen g2, no checkmate, game over. But after bishop e3, rook d8, I can't keep the queen on the diagonal. So when I move my queen to like c2, after queen h3, spaghetti-o, checkmate, game over, you lose your third game of the candidates tournament. So it's actually quite tricky to play because I need the queen targeting the pawn. So here I play rook e1, and now Veselin plays rook d8, again trying to go for the go for the lolly with rook d2. Say I play rook b3, takes, queen h3, GG once again. So here I play rook b2, so now if rook takes d2, I can take the rook, and I'm still targeting the pawn on f3. So here Veselin plays rook d4. And by the way, the fact, you know how you can tell this game is really not clear, you guys, is the fact that the computer gives us this 0.5, which means Veselin's sack maybe in reality wasn't all that bad, because it's not really saying it's much of an advantage here. So after rook d4, I go rook e7, Goes rook a d8 here, and now I play queen to b3. Now apparently this is a mistake. I see the bar went to 0, so let me see. So computer says here apparently rook e3, rook a d8, knight to b1 to guard, because obviously if I trade, we're just even material here. And after knight b1, knight e4, computer says queen f3, trade takes, rook b6. And I guess white has an advantage. I don't know how, I mean, how much of an advantage this is. Like takes here, rook d5. I mean, white's definitely better, but objectively I suspect that this should be a draw, even though again I have an extra pawn, like rook a8, rook c8, or actually, yeah, rook a8, rook c8, not rook c7, sorry. Actually no, rook f6, sorry, rook e7. And maybe black can take here and make a draw. I'm not 100% sure, but very, very complex at any rate and not easy to spot. So apparently this would have been the best move for me to play with knight b1, but again I am only human at the end of the day, so I didn't go for this. So rook e7, rook d8. Now I go queen to b3 here, and he plays rook to f8, guarding. Of course he cannot go queen h3, going for checkmate, because then I checkmate him with queen f7, queen g7, and of course rook d2 doesn't work for the exact same reason, takes and checkmate. So here he plays rook f8, and now I go queen d1, and now he goes rook d8. I go back, he goes here, and now I play knight d1, deciding, you know what, when in doubt, I have an extra bishop here, I have to try to play on. I can't just make a draw. I have the white pieces, I'm already having a bad event, I got to go for it. So I play knight d1, and now he goes knight d5. Now apparently computer says that after the very, very obvious looking queen to f5, black is apparently better, and I don't know why black is better. I guess, yeah, I don't know. Black is apparently just better here. Don't ask me why. I don't ask me why. It makes no sense at all. So at any rate, Veselin does not find that move. He plays knight d5, and now I go rook to e5, and he goes king h7. Apparently computer again says knight f6 is a draw, and yet again we see why humans are so terrible at chess. So he goes king h7, which by the way is a big mistake. King h7 actually loses the game here, because by going king h7 I now have time to go king h2, and there are no more lollies here because I cover the h3 square, and now I have time to unwind with like knight e3, or maybe even bishop e3, because there's no queen h3 check here. So after king h2 the game is, I think, essentially over here. What Veselin should have done, as I said, was probably just gone knight f6, and we could have had a draw with rook e7. Maybe I have some other moves as well, but very tricky. So he goes here, which is a blunder, because now after king h2, knight f6, I just go bishop e3, and again he's trying to get the knight to g4, but it's just too little too late. Plays rook b8, I take, he takes the knight on d1, and now I go rook to b1. Very important move here, by the way, because he's threatening to make another lolly. If I go rook b7, he has rook h1 check, king h1, queen h3, king g1, queen g2, and there still is a checkmate. But instead I play rook b1, and now he no longer has any checkmating patterns available, and he really only has a knight because my bishop guards all the pawns. So there's only a queen and knight in the attack here. Of course he's going to lose, so he goes queen d7, trying to get knight g4. And now the one last important move that I find is rook g5, because if I take on d1 there's still knight g4, king g1, queen d1 checkmate. And if I go king h3 here, he goes knight f2, and he gets the lolly anyway with queen h3 and queen g2 checkmate. So here after queen d7 I play rook to g5, stopping knight g4, and again there are not enough moves. There's no rook h1, there's no knight g4, and eventually I'm going to be able to win this, because again he really only has 3 pieces, and if he can't keep moving forward and attacking, the extra forces, the extra material is going to play. Similar to how like the blitzkrieg, you know, it just simply failed, because once they weren't able to keep pushing forward, eventually the superior forces of the allies, once they were able to regroup and everything, we were able to win the war. So it's the exact same thing. So yeah, so in this position, if black isn't able to use these 3 pieces and attack very quickly, eventually the extra rook is going to play. So he goes knight e4 here. So I trade the rooks here, and now I go queen to f4 again. I don't care about the rook on g5 here, because again if black takes, now I just have a queen and bishop versus a queen, so the extra forces will win the game. So after queen f4 I don't care if he takes the rooks, just I have the queen and the bishop here. So he takes on g5, I take, and after h takes g5 Veselin resigns here, because in this position I have a queen and a bishop. He still can't get a lolly because queen f1 I just take, and long term, I mean, I guess he can just go king g8, but now there are many ways to win this. Probably simplest just to go g4 and king g3 and eat the juicer on f3 here. So very important win for me in this game. Very messy game, of course, at the same time, but I defended very well. I found some critical moves, and with this win I moved myself back into the race, potentially to qualify for the candidates tournament. All right, so let's move on. We still have time for one more game. So now we're going to move to the next game that I played against Fabiano Caruana with the black pieces. So again, I was feeling pretty good at this point. I mean, I was still on -1, so I still wasn't really in the running to win the tournament per se, but I had just won a game after two terrible losses in the first half of the tournament. So this game, I believe, was round number 8, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So yeah, so this was exactly the first game after the halfway mark. So in the first 7 games, I had 2 losses, 1 win, and 4 draws. And so in this eighth game against Fabiano, I was playing with the black pieces. So e4 was played here. Played e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5. I played knight f6 again, playing Ich bin ein Berliner. D3, bishop c5, and here Fabiano takes on c6. Again, Vichy played castles earlier in the event, and c3, of course, is the other main move. So he takes on c6. I play d takes c6 here, and now he plays knight b d2. Now, this line is still very common even now. The Berlin opening, obviously the Berlin defense is very prominent even today, but all these lines are still played. I myself, I believe, played knight b d2 against none other than El Magneto Carlsen in one of the Meltwater finals back at the end of 2020. So here I castle. Queen e2 is played by Fabiano. I go rook e8, knight c4, and now I play knight d7, and Fabiano goes bishop d2. I played bishop d6, and now Fabiano castles. Now, looking back on sort of this this whole setup that I employed, I felt that at the time it was perhaps not the best setup to play, because it seems as though even though the computer always says that black is okay here, white gets very easy attacking possibilities on the king side here, and it's very hard to defend against. And I actually beat Magnus in a very similar way as well in the Meltwater Tour final with something similar. So after castles, I played b5. He goes knight e3, play a5, knight f5, and now I play a4. And here Fabiano finds a very nice little tickle with bishop g5. Now initially you're probably like, well, I mean, what is bishop g5? I just go f6, kick the bishop away. However, what this does is that after I play f6 and he goes back, white now can play g4, g5 and just rip open this g file towards my king on g8. Whereas if we get to this position, white plays g4, just to illustrate it, even if you go g5 here, you're not really targeting anything. You can try to get knight h6, but there's no way to open up this g file and blast through. So bishop g5 is a very nice move. I go f6 here. Knight f6 is maybe a move, but again, after g4, h4, h5, and this pin and this knife on f5, it looks really scary to play. So I go f6 here. He goes bishop e3. Now I go knight c5, and now Fabiano goes g4. Very basic concept. He wants to go g4, rook g1. Sorry, I should say h4, rook g1, g5, g takes f6, and just crash through on the g file here. So I play bishop e6 here. Now again, one of the things that's very tough is that as I look at this with the engine, it actually thinks that after knight e6, rook h g1, apparently after knight f4, black is completely fine here, but it's still, for a human, it doesn't really make sense, because after queen d2 you still see g5 coming in here. You have weakness on d6 and f4. There's also a d4 pawn break in the center, and it just looks overwhelming for white. So here I play bishop to e6. Now king b1 is played here by Fabiano, and now I go b4. He plays g5 here, and now I decide to play b3, which apparently is not the best move. Computer says that I should probably play a3, b3, takes, and then maybe go e4 here. But again, very difficult to figure out. What's going on in this position. Again, with a weaker computer, I'm also not completely convinced by the evaluation that I see where it says zeros. So a lot of options here. Anyway, the reason that I prefer this position for white is that white is the one who has an obvious idea. White is either going to break through and just go like h4, h5, h6, rook g1, gf6, and just crash on the h and the g files, or he's going to get checkmated. But white has one plan, whereas for black, it's not really concrete what I'm doing. Am I trying to attack on the queen side? Am I going to try to stop the attack on the king side? I have too many options here, and that actually makes it a lot harder to play in this position. So I decided to go b3. Fabiano plays rook g1, and now I take, and he goes king a1. And unfortunately, already at this point, this is actually winning for white, because the problem is that even though I have this pawn here on a2, it's sort of like the hostage pawn. I forget who coined that phrase, but I really liked it, whoever said that, where like the pawn is in front of the king. So it's like if this pawn wasn't here, then of course it's like, you know, you got the you got the federales, and of course the king just dies on a1, but with the pawn in the way you can't really get to the king here. So because of that, if I try a3 b3 for example, there's no way to get to the king. So for that reason it's just it's very bad already, because I have no attack. This pawn just kills any attack towards the king, because it's just all in the way. So what I should have done here apparently is I should not have done this. After rook g1, computer says I guess g6 and knight h6 king h8, you know, and you basically you have no fear of anything here, even though it looks really scary with D's puka, like knight g5. I mean, this looks really scary objectively to me, but apparently computer says, oh yeah, you just go rook b8, ignore everything on the king side, you've got nothing around your king except a couple of pawns, and you're completely fine, of course. So at any rate, this is okay, but as I said, for a human it's very hard to play, because white has an obvious idea to attack, whereas with black I have to figure out, am I trying to go all in attack, am I going to try to stop the attack on the king side, what am I doing? I have too many options. So I take on a2, king a1 is played, and now I trade, and I go a3, Fabiano goes b3, and now I have no attack at all. The king is just very safe here on a1, 2 pawns in the way, and I'm probably just lost here because white has a free hand to just attack on the king side. So I play knight to a6 here. The idea is to go knight b4, maybe try to put pressure on c2 and guard the pawn. Maybe I can also get some e4, bishop e5 checkmate as well, where the king can't capture a2. So he plays c3 here. Fabulous move by Fabiano, basically cuts off the knight, no knight b4 jump. Also he prepares d4, also he can just go queen a2, and there's just no attack, because even here if he takes with the king, I still have a hostage pawn on a3, so I still can't get an attack without this b4 square, so it's completely lost. So he goes c3 here. So now I play bishop f8, Fabiano goes knight d2. Idea now to relocate the knight to e4 and put more pressure on f6 here, and already this is just completely lost. I take on g5, he plays rook g5, knight c5, he goes rook g3. I don't really understand rook g3, but I guess the idea was simply just to stop me from taking on d3, because after trade and knight e4 I have to go, I guess, knight f4, but there's knight f6 check to win material. Even rook d7 here, this looks terrible for black. I have 2 sets of double stacks, white's got a great knight, big attack here, weaknesses abound, and it's completely lost. Scaredy human, there was nothing to be afraid of. I agree. And actually one cool checkmate here would be check here and rook h3, because after h6 there's rook h6, and there's an Arabian checkmate here with the knight and the rook, and this is a very nice idea. So I can't take on d3, so I just, or actually I probably should take, but I go e4 here. Fabiano trades, and now he goes knight takes e4. I go bishop d6, and he just goes rook h3, and already here black can pretty much resign. There's queen h5, there's rook g1, big attack on the h file and g file. King is very safe here, of course, on a1, nothing happening, and it's just GG. So I go bishop to e5 here, and now he goes pawn to d4. I play bishop f6. I recommend Hikaru takes sacrifice to square lesson. I myself have sacrificed many a pawn to get a knight to e4, the pawn on f5, but thank you. So rook g1 is played here. I go rook b8, and now Fabiano plays king takes a2. Not even really necessary, I don't think, but, or maybe it is because b3 is actually hanging, but anyway, he takes. I go bishop h4, rook g4, play queen d5, one last gasp of air to try and create a checkmate on b3, like takes check, and I get a mate here. Unfortunately for me, Fabiano plays c4, and I just resign the game here, because after queen f5 white can just take, rook guards the knight and the rook, and if I go queen d4 again, just takes, because the queen on e2 guards b2 and the rook on h4 guards e4. So I lose this very unfortunate 8th round game to Fabiano with the black pieces. Very unfortunate, and I moved back to -2. So right as soon as I dug myself out of the hole with that win against Veselin, I then lose the very next game to Fabiano. So very unfortunate, certainly, to lose this way, but it is what it is. It feels like Fabiano had 99% accuracy. I don't think it's 99% accuracy, but the problem is that Fabiano was in a situation where he had too many easy moves to play. Like when I look at this game, almost all of his moves were very easy. There were no really difficult moves. Like once he hits this point, it's like, okay, it's like I'm all in, I'm attacking. So he has a lot of easy moves, and I have to find difficult moves, which I don't think is realistic. I think probably here, maybe I could have looked at, maybe this one I should have seen, but even after d4, okay, yeah, computer says knight b3. I mean, yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, as I said before, as I said before, one of the things that I'm really excited about playing the candidates is that I do have a chance to play with no pressure, and so I think my calculations, my analysis should be better throughout the event versus how I played, because I think things like this I just would not have seen them in 2016 because I was feeling too much pressure, feeling way too much pressure. So that is why that's probably more than any other reason I'm excited, because it's not even so much about winning, it's just having a chance to play better, because I really did not feel like I really felt like I played very poorly. I didn't think I even really played decently in the candidates in 2016. So all right, anyway, so yeah, so I lost this 8th round game to Fabiano, and with that I ended up back on -2. I had 3 losses, 1 win and 5 draws, and again my mindset was back in a very, very bad spot where I was not happy, not even decent. Well, I think that what I would say is that when you look at games that you lose, I think this is the best way of looking at it. When you look at games that you lose, you want your opponent to basically outplay you and have to find some really good moves. And when I look at this game, Fabiano had to find a couple of moves that maybe were a little bit difficult, like maybe C3, but again, C3 I don't think is a tough move to find, and it's not the only move that's winning here. And so I felt like in this game specifically, Fabiano did not have to find any like hard moves. He didn't have to find any hard moves. Whereas if you look at like the game that I won against Veselin, I had to find a couple of very critical moves to win that game. So like let's just say I had Veselin's position, I wouldn't be that upset about the game because the opponent found a couple of moves they had to find. But like this game, I felt like this game specifically, I don't feel like there were any moves that were really that difficult, and I think actually in most situations there were multiple moves that were probably winning for Fabiano. Like knight d2 is winning, d4 is winning. I mean b4, okay, that's kind of a little bit weird, but d4 and knight d2 are both very, very strong here. And so because of that, like if you're gonna lose a game, you want your opponent to have to like find some very tough moves, and if they do and you lose, I mean, so be it, that's life. But when I look at the loss in this tournament, I don't necessarily think that was totally true, because Levon, for example, had many opportunities to beat me in the previous game, and he had many opportunities, and he actually kind of threw some of them away, and at the end I should have drawn that game. And the game that I lost, who else? The game that I lost to Sergey, actually, to be fair, Sergey, that game against Sergey, I think Sergey found some very good moves as well. So I think the Sergey one I couldn't really be unhappy with, but these other two, definitely it's not how you want to lose. If you're going to lose, you want your opponent to find a couple of really difficult moves, or of course if they just show a great idea. For example, when I played Fabiano in the RCC and he played that Italian idea, if you lose a game like that, again, there's nothing you can do about it, just great idea, you move on. When you feel like your bad moves, you didn't have to put any pressure on them, and it was a very smooth, easy game for them, it feels like somehow you just don't feel, it just doesn't feel, it's not the feeling you want. So that's generally what I would say about it. Sergey found some pretty bad moves in the past few months, though. That's true. Yeah, that's true. It was your first candidates as well, right? It's not an unusual struggle in the first one. Certainly true, of course, when you play the candidates tournament, which is why when I talk about Ali Reza, he's going to be feeling immense pressure, because for Ali Reza, he's expected to win the tournament. It's not like he's expected to just play and do well. He's like expected to win the tournament, and anything but a win from the tournament is going to be basically a failure, a complete failure. So that's why, of course, when I talk about the tournament, and I talk about like Ali Reza specifically, it's much different because everybody else wants to do well, but Ali Reza's, you know, sort of viewed as the future, or the person who's supposed to do it all. Magnus won the first candidates, yes, but he also had a very tough event too.